It's just gonna sit like that. Yeah, you'll be fine. If it falls over, that's not unheard of in my world. There might be a reason it has a rugged case. Alright, so you've heard from Amy. Amy has, introduced herself already. But I'm going to ask the rest of our panel. I'm guessing many in the room know many of the people up here. But if you would just give us a little intro as to who you are, kind of your experience with theater so that everybody kind of knows your background. We will start with, according to my list, Jay-Lan, you get to start.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jay-Lan Halliburton. I have been involved with theater for quite a few years now. I was involved in it in college. I actually got bit by the acting bug in high school and began to go out for different auditions and such. But I really got involved once I got to college, and as time went on, I got more and more involved, learning about the industry, learning about, local theater, learning about all different forms of it, and I've just grown to love it more, and I'm continuing to pursue.
Where'd you go to school, Jim?
Are you talking about for college or high school?
College.
I went to Indiana University Northwest, IUN.
Okay.
Cool. Mike?
I'm Mike Reinhart from Ross Music Theater. My first theater experience with my dad. He started Ross Music Theater 60 years ago, and we did Flower Drum Song, which
There's a yeah.
I was a little Chinese child, because it was all white. So, of course, something you would never do again. You couldn't find black hairspray any place in Northwest Indiana, as we brought all that out. But that was before, before you had to, that's when everyone was doing West Side Story too. But so that was my first experience on stage, and he did summer shows. It was like, if we wanted to see my parents, we had to do the summer shows. So so I've been brought up in that culture for, since I was 8 years old. Melinda and I now run Ross Music Theater. We also do the musical at Maryville High School, and I run the auditorium at Maryville High School, and that's been doing it. Been doing this for over 50 years. So.
Cool. And I'm Becky Jaskowiak, and I have been doing theater for about 25 years. I did not do any theater at all in high school. In fact, I was anti-stage. I did everything musical. I did pit, I did, so that was theatrical, but I did not go on stage. And then when I went to college and I didn't get into the orchestra, I redirected my artistic talents into the theater and have been doing that ever since, and I haven't really played my instrument ever since. So thanks, Mom and Dad, for all those lessons that now are used otherwise. But most of the time I am directing or stage managing on the production side. Occasionally I will get on stage. There'll be a show that, just has a certain pull to it, but that's my experience with theater. So let's talk a little bit about each of our experiences with blind casting, non-traditional casting, alternative casting, however you would like to define that. So Mike, we'll start with you.
Okay, so I'm from Maryville, which when I was growing up, it was 100% white. There's, but I've been there as it's now transitioned to a minority majority. It's probably 90% minority probably now. But what's interesting is, as far as shows go, when Melinda first started taking over the musicals, everybody, well, every white person we knew said, you guys should do The Wiz. And that's always what, anytime they have a play, it's, you should do The Wiz, anything. And these kids don't want to just do The Wiz. They, we've done Oklahoma, we've done Music Man, we've done, between the high school and the summer shows, and we did Phantom twice, and we did Les Mis twice, and those casts were primarily black. But we didn't even look at it that way. We didn't say, what can we just look at what the talent is and what we basically know is coming, and that's how we cast it that way. It's actually, I don't even think about it when they go up, and gender, we haven't really played with that much as far as changing gender of a character, or having someone play, when we did musicals at Whiting, we did do Joseph, and we had to have some girls play guys there, but I don't think that would bother us either if that's something we had to do. I mean, if we ever wanted to do Newsies, you would have to have girls. You can't find guys that dance, so you'd have to find. And so as far as every time we do a show, it's we don't. The only time that we have cared about race, we did Ragtime and we did Memphis, and both of those are very important that you have the correct race. As a matter of fact, when we were doing research on Ragtime and see what other people did with different problems, we found an all-white cast of Ragtime. A high school. It's not up there anymore, obviously, but they changed it from black to Irish. It was horrible. It was. Now we had the opposite problem with Sister Act. Sister Act. We had plenty of black girls that could play Dolores, and we had a really good Dolores, but the dynamic is when she gets to this convent, there should be all white old women, because there are racist jokes that these women. There was one about asking, what part of Harlem did you come from? And another black person asking, it didn't make any sense. And there was 5 or 6 lines like that where the actual nuns should have been white. So we had to change, and we had to change lines. And before we did, we let the kids change it. They're black, I'm not. What would you say? What would you put in place of this? And we just brainstormed, and that's when we got the approval. It was their lines that that was in there, because I didn't want them to say something that they weren't comfortable with. But right. So that's our experience with the non-traditional casting.
Jay-Lan?
For me, I would say most of the roles I pretty much have either played or gone out for. They've typically been like a specific role that I can play, because typically many of the shows that I've been a part of, it hasn't been like too specific on, who can really play this character, who can play that character in a sense. There was only one show that I was involved in college, and it was a show called Well, that was written by Lisa Crone that we did. It was fall 2018, and it's basically the show that she wrote, and it consists of her mother, and 4 other ensemble characters, which have specific assigned ethnicities that they have to be played, and their genders. So that for me was like the first time where I was involved in a show that had to be specific. As a matter of fact, to go deeper into that experience, I'm being the only black person who auditioned for that role was given that role just because I was the only black person that did audition for that specific role. And for me, when I was given the role at the time, I'm like, well, yeah, I'm glad that, I got the role because, it's another credit that I get to add, and it's another chance for me to be on stage. But then I thought about it, is it, I got it because of that. I didn't get to have that experience of the competition of getting to really, go for that role. But I didn't mind it. And I would say, for me, playing different roles, I've been very open to that. As our recent times, I will admit now, I've become more, how can I say this? I pay attention more to the different roles when I audition to shows now. Specifically with all of the cancel culture and everything, because I want to make sure that, I'm making the right decision. I want to make sure that I'm not necessarily taking from anyone else or getting in the way. So my mind, when I go out for roles, is definitely more focused on, okay, what does it say? Can I do it? As opposed to just just taking. But I am still open to, accepting roles. So that's my experience.
Amy.
I've had both sides of the experience to where I've had, again, my high school is predominantly white, but I do have students of color very often, and we do have a lot of international students who've been a part of my program. So I've had, as far as race goes, I don't really think about that or consider it. I have gotten some backlash for silly things sometimes from the community. I have also done stuff with gender where I've had female students be like, can I play, a male knight in Once Upon a Mattress? Of course you can. I can stick a mustache on you and do whatever you want to do, So I'm always very open to it, and we've used several occasions, like my Horton was a young black student, my Pippin was a black student, but then the king and his half-brother were both white students, and that's where I got backlash. It was just like, well, there's no way that's a family. And I'm like, did you understand the story? Yes, then you're good. I don't, right? I really didn't understand where that one was coming from. I had a female play JoJo in my Seussical as well. And the ones who ask the questions the most are when we do our productions for the local grade school students. And they said, how come that's a girl, but they kept calling her a he? And I said, when your mom and dad tell you stories at home, do they use voices for all the characters? And does it matter if mom's reading a boy character or a girl character? And they went, yeah. And I said, that's what we're doing. We just wanted to tell you a story. Totally accepted it, moved on with their lives. So it was great. So I have always been very open to it. But we have had a couple occasions where, yeah, we've had to answer questions to people as to, well, why would you do that? That doesn't make sense to me. Well, I'm sorry it doesn't make sense to you, but we told the story, and that's all that matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have you felt like your administration backs you up if there's ever?
My current administration would probably let me get away with absolutely anything I wanted to in the world. Prior administrators are the ones who would bring me the problem and tell me to deal with it, is basically how that went. I think if I had to have seriously gone to bat for anything, they might have supported me as long as I had a good, valid, solid argument. If I was ever blindsided by it, I think I would have been shut down even by administration. But I try to think 2 steps ahead. I try.
Sure. So, a couple of experiences. One in a production, well, both, we'll talk 2 versions of Willy Wonka. One, prior to me being married to the actor who played Willy Wonka, he was cast, and he said, how in the world could I be cast as Willy Wonka? I don't look like Gene Wilder. I said, why does it matter that you look like Gene Wilder? This has nothing to do with the production, right? But that, I mean, like, that's a very traditional thing, just like your example about Whoopi Goldberg being Dolores. Well, it's an iconic character that people, you know, identify with and recognize. And then in our second version of Willy Wonka, we had a black Charlie, a Hispanic dad, and a very white mother. And we got the same thing. Well, that's clearly not a family. Hello? I mean, I could walk down the street and see that family walking down the street. So, you know, what does it matter? And, you know, and then finding out after, without knowing, finding out after that Roald Dahl's original intent was that Charlie was black. And that he was trying to portray a very poor child, and it got taken off not being black because they didn't want a stereotype. So the opposite side of the equation there. I have also been, I've played a servant on stage half a dozen times because the, you know, we lose an actor and people keep moving up the chain, and so the bottom gets filled in by the director or the stage manager. That's me. And inevitably, it was thought of as, you know, a black character because it was a servant. I'm like, why does that have to be an equation? It doesn't at all. And so everybody who has to work for a living, you know, people have servants in their house, whether it's a housekeeper, you know, I mean, like, it doesn't have to be whatever. So anyway, those were my experiences. So let's talk about from a director standpoint. So Jay-Lan, you get a break for a second. So the three of us that have directed, what made you decide to use alternative casting, and maybe what good things happened, what bad things happened? You kind of alluded to it already, but yeah.
I don't know that I consciously choose it. It is definitely, I am of the school of thought of the best actor for the role. And I don't think I've ever chosen a show where I felt that the race or the gender of a character was the central issue. That's when I would feel I need to be more conscious of the decisions that I was making. So I don't know that that's ever come into my realm that I've been like, I'm choosing this because. However, what I'm doing in the spring now, so this brings up the point that some people have already been talking about in the room, me doing this project and all this sort of thing is going to come to a culmination in the spring. I am going to direct 1776 at my school, which was one never be on my radar because there's no way I would ever get enough guys. And then all of a sudden, here's this Broadway production, and I have been talking for years of doing a gender bent 1776, and so I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it with non-traditional casting, and I don't care what their gender, race, body type, anything is. I'm going to cast who's ever best for the role, and I'm super excited about it.
And you've already done the research to know that
Yes.
that is acceptable.
100%.
Yeah.
And the new all-female cast that's on Broadway, actually now they are making changes and stuff to the script. So I already have the rights and royalties, and they have told me that the script that I get come January may look very different from the traditional script because they're just adjusting. So they're obviously not changing any gender of characters, but they're just trying to make sure that there's nothing inherently that would make a female feel uncomfortable playing a male role, that sort of thing. So I'm interested.
Yeah. Mike, what about you?
What was the question again?
Yeah, sure. So, how have you come to purposely make an alternative casting decision, or, you know, what good things have come out of it? What, you know?
Oh, well, you know, it's just everything it's everything that we do. So it's not, we just pick a show that we like, and none of them, and usually they are not race. There's nothing, doesn't have to do anything with historical, of any historical value other than they're just telling a story. I mean, Oklahoma, it doesn't matter who Curly is, does it? And in we did get some when we did Les Mis and when we did Phantom. which takes place in France back, where there would be no black people in any position of power back then. We didn't care about that. When we cast, we look at it as the world should be. Like there is no racism, that any of these people can be any of these people if they work their way up to do it. Because the play does not deal with race or does not deal with racism. It just deals with people living their lives. And so musicals are fairy tales anyway. And so when we do something like that, we just look at it as, okay, we play everything that, this is Music Man, and our quartet was black. They wouldn't, in Iowa back then, you wouldn't have had anybody but we didn't care. We were saying, what if back then we didn't have racism and everyone could be whoever they wanted to be? And that's the way we look at it. That we did Memphis one time because of the talent that we had. We knew that we had people that could play these parts, but that had to be race specific because it dealt with racism and appropriation of music and that kind of thing. So those are the only, and sometimes we have picked those because of the talents you have. You know who's coming, and you think, okay, so these people can play.
Yep.
But last year we knew what talent we had. We said, we got to do Charlie Brown because that's the talent we had.
And then
So
worrying about COVID too, about cast and.
So that was we didn't care what. And those Charlie Brown characters obviously are from Charles Schultz, and he was white, and they're about his people. So about him growing up with his, but we didn't care. It didn't matter. Everyone grew up with the Peanuts. There was only one that was kind of interesting. Was we did Leap of Faith, which if you saw the movie, it's Steve Martin, and he has the black. The play's a little different, and there is a dynamic between the white pastor and the black gospel choir, in that it's an interesting dynamic to study because he really loves these people, but he still uses them. He still kind of takes advantage of, but he cares about them. He's kept them off the street. But and you could do it any way you wanted. You could have a black Jonas, you could have a white gospel choir, or you could have it all black. It wouldn't matter. But then you change that dynamic a little bit too. So that one reason we picked that was a dynamic we wanted to study a little bit, and it came out very well. But those are the only two plays that we ever looked at that thought where we were thinking that race made a difference in the casting. But everything else, we did Cinderella. Anything you can think of, we've done, and it doesn't matter what color the cast was. We didn't care.
I can make a comment.
Yeah.
You were going back to like when you did Phantom or like Les Mis, and they were saying, well, it takes place in France and it's during this time and whatnot. And I also think too that we forget that the reason why we're having this conversation at all is because the history of white colonialism and white stories being told.
Right.
Like, yes, accurately, yes. In 18 whatever in France, no, there were, it was probably predominantly a white culture, right? But that's not the issue we're talking about. We're talking about stories that have been traditionally told from a white perspective,
Right.
okay, that way outnumber the racial perspective stories
Sure.
of black people, Hispanic people, even down to sexuality and gender. So when it comes to yes, when you're doing ragtime, you need to cast traditionally because it is about that. It is in that era. But when it comes to Les Mis, the story is about these people.
Right. Yeah, it
You know
makes
what I
no
mean?
difference.
It's set in France. It's set there. We get that. But the story is about these people.
Yeah.
And
I always
yeah.
come back to, if you can suspend your disbelief enough that people break into song every 5 to 10 minutes, you can't suspend your belief that Cinderella could be black.
Right.
That happens all the time, right?
Yeah, right? I mean, come on.
In my classes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't
100%. So your presentation was, obviously based in educational theater, and most of us also work in community theater. And so I want to talk a little bit about what the differences are there and, you know, the selection of shows in community theater or professional theater or other styles of theater, you know, social impact theater versus educational. And when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate to alternatively cast. So jump in if you have a comment.
A lot of the research that I did, and I'm a what I call down the rabbit hole researcher, because I'll find something and then I'll want to read everything about that for the next 16 hours. And I oftentimes would go off on the tangent of, in professional theater, how they are not offering enough roles to and casting enough gender fluid people, people of color and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, the big one that I went down for a while, because it was right when I was in the middle of researching, was when the new cast was announced for Music Man, the fact that it was almost a completely whitewashed cast and people were appalled. Yes, it's Hugh Jackman. Yes, it's Sutton Foster. Fantastic, we love them. But is that the Music Man we needed right now? And that is a question that I struggle with, is it's like, but Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster are phenomenal, and those are roles that they would be phenomenal in. So what outweighs them, the talent, or the culture? What do we need to, and I really do, I struggle with that, and I think about it a lot, and actually it just makes me more content to know that I'm thinking about it and not ignoring it. Mm-hmm. To know that the conversation is there. I'm happy with that point. But then things can get out of hand. The one that blows my mind, Lin-Manuel Miranda, the man who took it upon himself to open these conversations and change the way that we're viewing the world. And then he makes the film of In the Heights, and the first thing that happens is he gets criticized because he didn't have enough dark-skinned Latinos represented in his film. And he apologized for it and said, oh my gosh, that's so, and I'm like, we've missed the point. This man has made huge strides, and they were in the film, but they weren't enough for you. Now you're trying to cancel the people who are making the strides, who are doing that. Like, that's where I struggle, is it's like, we are very bad at finding the line. And we either just go from one extreme to the other, but there is so much in the middle, and that's why the conversations need to be held more. That's what bothers me, I'm sorry. That's my soapbox.
Good. Other thoughts on that?
Can I ask you a question about what you were talking earlier that kind of ties into this? Did you feel like when you were cast in that role, being the only Black person that auditioned for it, did you feel it was important to represent, you know what I mean, like that you were cast in that role to represent it over, I'm not saying that you weren't more talented than the other people, but just, you know, like, just say it, like, if, for an example, if there was somebody that you felt was more talented and should have gotten the role, but you got it because of that, what do you feel is more important? Would it be more important for you to represent that role as it was written, or for the talent?
Or to beat somebody else?
The show to go on.
Yeah.
That's a very good question.
I'm just curious to hear
At
from
the
the
time,
minority.
I must admit, at the time, and this is just me speaking my truth, I did not really think about, I wasn't like, how can I say this? I wasn't as fluent about on the topic of representation, if that makes sense, because I was never really the person to think about, like, oh my goodness, it's good that I'm representing myself. Because when and just to be honest, when I first came to the theater department at IUN, I was the only Black person in the department for my entire first year. As a matter of fact, kind of going into my second year. So, and being taught diversity and, you know, wanting to think outside of just who you are, I didn't really think too much on the representation part. It hasn't been until like really as time went on and I began to learn more about, you know, the purpose of theater and the purpose of really entertainment in general, to really reach people and such. That, oh, okay, so now I got, you know, when I'm taking on this role, I'm not just taking it for myself, but I'm taking it for this person, I'm taking it for that person. That's when it began to click into me.
Yeah.
So I think at the time, I will believe that, I did believe that, you know, it should go to whoever, you know, deserves it. But also conflicting with that, just me and myself was happy that I did get it, but looking back, I still wish I would have had that competition. And now, me today, looking back, if I had that thought of representation on my mind, I would definitely say, yes, I would take the role. And it is good to have that representation in the show. And I would definitely want to try my best to tell the truth and be honest in how I would portray that character.
God bless you.
That
That's what I was
answers.
hoping, that's what I was hoping you would say, that you didn't feel any kind of like negative
Yeah,
way.
always, please, yeah, this is open, yeah.
So, speaking of representation, I think that's something that we have to think about, or we get the opportunity to think about too, when we talk about this non-traditional casting. For us, when we do it, we, again, don't say, oh, we're going to do it. It just happens because these are our kids. And we want to put forward who's best, but also representation does matter. And so while, like last year when we did Frozen Junior and our Anna and our young Anna were black, like being able to show our elementary school students that, and yes, they're, you know, the little white kids will look at Cinderella and she's white, or Elsa and she's white, and Anna and she's white at Disney World, but also the little black kids can look at Anna doing the same and see that she looks the same. Or I was just thinking about this with the Queen, like the Queen of England, like we won't see another queen, and who won't see another, we'll only see kings. And the next kid, the next generations will only see kings. And to, you know, does that really matter? But the representation of a woman could be the top of that as well. You know what I mean? So while we do non-traditional casting, representation does matter.
And if there had been more black kids cast, there might have been more kids in your program by the time you got there, right?
And to go off the Frozen Junior from last year, I had students in my class, black students, who went to go see it, and they're like, oh, I didn't know I could play, like, I could have been Elsa. I could have been, they didn't audition because they didn't think they could go out for that role, you know what I mean? And like seeing that, they're like, oh, I can, I didn't know that, you know? So that was really refreshing to see, you know, and hear, and have them realize that, yeah, you can be these roles. Just because they look a certain way, you know, on TV or whatever, we're not TV, we're in here, you know? And you were talking about the Music Man on Broadway. I'm actually going to be directing Music Man in Oak Lawn. And Oak Lawn doesn't have a very diverse community. So what I told my choreographer is, you know, I want diverse couples in our show. So like meaning, you know, black and white couples, but also during Shapoopy, I'd like to see two guys be a couple. I'd like to see two women be a couple, you know? Because again, this show doesn't deal with those issues. It's not about any of that. So that can exist in the world untouched, you know what I mean? And not affect the story in any way. So, you know, it's about, you know, and you were saying like, you know, is this the Music Man we need now, and that's what people were expecting. And, I think us as directors and educators, we do have that opportunity to give them the Music Man that they need now,
Right.
or the Frozen that they need now, not the one that everyone is expecting.
Let me know if you need stuff, I have stuff.
Okay.
Amy always says,
I've done that one, and I have stuff.
I want to say, I think what kind of got me into paying attention to representation was when I saw the backlash of the casting for the new live action of The Little Mermaid, which amazingly, the trailer came out yesterday, and here we are today, so perfect timing. Like when I saw the backlash and just saw how everyone felt that, The Little Mermaid could not be black in a sense. Oh, it should be white, and red hair and over that. That's what kind of woke up the sleeping giant of that thought process for me. Because, just, it made me look at myself like, why is that,
You want to play Ariel?
You would be a fabulous Ariel. I would pay for that show.
No.
Woke up that sleeping desire to play Ariel.
Let's go.
I'm going to try that.
But it made me look at myself as, an African American actor, like, oh my goodness, there's really people that believe that, I wouldn't be, that people that look like me are not fit for this type of role. It's like, why is that? Why is that the case? When, it should be about the talent. So it's like from that day forward, I just began paying attention to representation. Anytime I see representation, it's like, it just brings, it's more positive for me now because I pay attention to it more now because I know that why it's important. I understood why it's important because, even though I was not the topic of that particular situation, it still came to me at a very personal level, being that same ethnic as the actress playing Ariel.
Yeah.
And what I don't understand about that is a mermaid is a fictional.
Right.
Yeah,
Have you seen the people up in arms about the black elves in
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings?
I mean,
They're losing their minds.
I know.
That's not historically accurate. I'm sorry, when are elves in history?
Yeah.
they could be
Or-
green or purple.
Yeah.
What difference does it make? They're
Precisely.
fictional characters.
Totally. So I'm going to be a bit provocative here and move to a topic that we haven't quite delved into a little bit. And that is, what about characters with disabilities?
Oh.
And whether or not the actor should have that disability, or is it required? Is it, how does that fit into our discussion?
I have the flip of what you just said. When we did Steampunk Christmas Carol, I had an actress who has cerebral palsy, and she requires the use of the walking canes.
Yep.
So I cast her in the show and gave her several roles, and we made really long bloomers for her that covered her shoes that had the lifts in them and stuff. And we made her Scrooge's sister in the one scene when she calls him to come home. Dad says you can come home. And we put her in a wheelchair. I was like, why can't Scrooge's sister have a disability? Not a problem. It doesn't change anything inherently. And then in other scenes we had her, she asked, I said, you can use your sticks, I don't care. She calls them her sticks.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't care. And she goes, nope, just give me things to lean up against. Give me things to hold on to. That's what she wanted. So I've done the opposite of that, but I don't think I've ever done a show where a character was required to have a disability.
Yeah, you did. You did Christmas Carol, Tiny Tim.
Well, yes, that's true. You're right. So yeah, I guess that would be like the quintessential. And I mean, I don't know if it's a necessity.
Well, that goes.
I think it goes to, what you were asking him, it's like, so do I go out of my way to find a child that has a disability so that I have an accurate Tiny Tim, or do I just make sure that I have that representation on the stage, so if a child with a disability comes to my show can go, oh, that's so great. I don't, that's...
Well,
You can't-
we did something a little bit in Newsies with Crutchy.
Oh, that's true too. Yeah, Crutchy has. Yeah, thank you.
But
Y'all are way
Sia
on game, and I'm not.
Sia that portrayed autistic person, was it Sia? That portrayed an autistic person in the movie, does that?
Yeah.
Oh.
Where, and then they got a lot of backlash because why
Didn't you
have an
cast
autistic
someone?
person?
Yeah.
In a
When their talent pool is a lot larger,
Yeah.
And
they can pay them,
right.
and they can, yeah.
And that's where that comes from. That's the difference, again, I think, from our level of theater to a professional world where they would
Right.
definitely have that available to them in their talent pool,
Yeah.
but I necessarily would not.
Or even like, Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, I think when you start telling stories about people on the spectrum or even people with disabilities, I think demographically, there's not many actors that have those kinds of disabilities and are
Right.
successful and are finding work and whatnot. So when we tell stories like that, I think it's more about telling the story of that person, and obviously if you do and you have someone that is, has that disability or can represent, absolutely have them represent. But also I think, having someone who isn't step into those shoes, and learn about that and become an advocate for stuff like that, I think it's just as important and powerful, through that experience,
Well, the boys next door.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
yeah.
couldn't,
Oh, yeah,
you couldn't
yeah.
possibly do that. You couldn't find that. The one that's severely handicapped, he has to do that speech where he steps out, and
Right.
it would be really hard to find someone with that disability that could do that. And not to tell that story or to show that inner,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't have someone that I think that's more of a sin
Right.
than to just not do the show. I know Valpo, when Chicago Street was in the Opera House, they did an unbelievable version of that show that,
David Carroll.
yeah, was amazing. And I thought it opened my eyes to a lot of things, and they did a lot of research. They went to homes, they went to people that had the disability, and found out what was insulting, not insulting, what would be the best way, and they talked to their parents and to their, so, I don't know if there's a tape of that somewhere, but it was one of the most amazing community theater productions I've seen of anything.
That's the key, is that background, doing that work and doing that research.
Right.
I mean, even like you said, asking your black students, what are you comfortable saying in Sister Act? What would be your dialogue here? It's that.
I mean, even in Ragtime,
Yep.
we asked, the N-word's in here all the time, what do you want us to do?
Right.
And of course, they keep it in, because that's what the
Point
story
of,
is.
yeah.
Sometimes your administration's not always
Yeah.
happy with, but this was a summer show, so we went to actually the diversity guy at Maryville, Danny Lackey, and said, what do you think?
That's
He goes, well, you can't tell the story
Without
that in there,
Yep.
so. But we had a lot of white people that did not want to use that.
Yeah. What did you
My
want to
question is, this is a little more provocative too, and I'd like to talk about community theater a little bit more too, but, is the advent of cancel culture, in and of itself, it's good, and it has moved us along, but is there a negative side? Are we afraid to cast the best actor because someone else has this disability? That's the big one, and I directed a 10-minute where I did cast a physically able girl to do it because I didn't know the other person that auditioned, and I've never worked with them, and I didn't know if I could trust them. And it was the main role, and that's a difficult thing as an actor. You know if they can do the part.
And see, that's where I would have a hard time as a director making that decision, because that's not my experience. So who am I to say that you fake and act being this disability better than the person with, I internally would struggle with that. Not saying I have the right or wrong answer there, but I would have a difficult time with
In my
that.
defense, they had a different disability.
Oh no, I get that, but that's me.
Well, my question is regarding community theater. Like you remember, it was about 5-6 years ago, Memorial Opera House did Hunchback of Notre Dame and cast a person in the gypsy role who wasn't a gypsy per se. And that's a gray area now. I think that was at the beginning of this whole movement. And who represents a gypsy? And there were people, I mean, it opened a firestorm of discussion on Facebook about this, and unbelievable. You know, you were afraid to even say anything for fear of being misinterpreted, and I was misinterpreted. But holy cow, are we taking it too far?
Right, that's my whole point about cancel culture is we don't know the lines. We go to one extreme or another,
Yeah,
we never find a common ground because we all think we're right.
And it
Well,
hurts
you
the
need to listen to
movement,
the
hurts the
minority.
So
movement.
my question is it affecting theater negatively for a good cause to include more people, but
Right.
acting is portraying someone that you have never lived.
I think the issue, honestly, is that cancel culture wants things to be metaphorically black or white. And when you're talking about diversity, it's gray. There's so many factors that go into the topic. Yeah, right.
It's black, brown, white,
Right,
yellow,
exactly.
red.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's not cut and dry what is offensive and what isn't. You have to break it down. You have to see what your situation is, what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Because not every
Nobody
situation
knows that
is,
except for you.
yeah, exactly. Not every situation has a distinct, yes, this is right, and yes, this is wrong.
And
You
so
know?
have we moved too far in the guise of trying to make all the right decisions and convince everyone that we are doing it for the right reasons?
Yeah.
And we're missing this wonderful production that we.
So one of the things that I wanted to have here today, and it didn't work out logistically, but I had seen a show at IUN. It was born out of the whole Trayvon Martin issues, and it was a short scene, and it was, you know, people living in an apartment, and they step outside, and something happens outside. And in certain neighborhoods, that's more common. In certain, it can happen anywhere. Really, you can walk in front of a car. But depending on the ethnicity of the actors playing that, you would have a very different thought process as to what happened when they walked out the door, right? So what I wanted to do was literally play the scene 3 times. Have 2 black actors, have 2 Asian actors, have 2 Hispanic actors. What happened when they walked out the door? And I think everybody's answer would be different because we all come to it from our own preconceived ideas, shaped by media and, you know, experience from all of our life and everything we've been exposed to. But my point in having set it up that way would be to drive this conversation that then leads to more understanding and, you know, hearing from diverse voices and things like that. And so to me, that is one of the absolute benefits of theater, is seeing life through another person's eyes that you can't experience on your own because that's not your lived experience. And so where is that place in theater? You know, like, we'll go back to the ragtime example. So that story is critically important to be telling right now. And why wouldn't we tell it? Yes, we want representation, but is there a way to tell it? Maybe it's this whole discussion model. We're gonna set it up a lot ahead of time. We have these actors on stage because this is who is available to us. In the time period, these would have been black actors. And then at intermission, you have, you know, like this is what would have changed. You know, this is what you're seeing because we feel the story is important. We don't think you're gonna understand the story differently. Then afterwards, you have a completely different discussion. Okay, how has that changed your viewpoint? If you, and I struggle with this all day long every day. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm saying my bent is toward social impact theater. And so I tend to do shows that drive questions, those of you that have been in my shows. You know, I tend to find things that are, that ask a question that I want people to go home, and as they're driving home, go, oh, I never thought about that. I wonder what, you know, I just want people to think, you know, and yes, there's a place for entertainment. Absolutely. I'm not discounting that either. But anyway, that was a long commentary to whatever you started
I'd like
with.
to ask,
I don't think you can tell ragtime that way. No.
I use that as an
Yeah.
example,
Yeah,
but
yeah. But yeah.
I think we would all go back to, because I'm not gonna lie, I struggle with the idea of, you know, can a person that's not in this particular situation play this type of situation? Or should you just, you know, give it to, you know, that person? I mean, not director, but I think about that a lot. I think it goes back to how you mentioned intent. Like, what is your intention when you make that choice of who you're going to, you know, have? Like, think about why you're going to use this person, and I think from there, as director, your best bet would be to work very closely with that actor to help them understand what they're going to be portraying, help them understand the representation that they're going to take on so that they will know how to do it justice, as opposed to them getting on, just taking on the role. And I know some of this may kind of counter what I was saying earlier about, you know, the time, but I'm still gonna say it, just so that they're not there believing that, oh, I can do this, I'm just gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. Like, take time to work with them and make sure that their intent is aligned with your intent, so that they can know how to properly portray that. And that's not to say that if you didn't have someone who, you know, has that disability, they can't do it. It's, you know, it goes back to the idea of the talent, but still, in a way to combat the issue of, you know, you don't understand, or how can you empathize or sympathize with this person that you've never experienced. I would say just work alongside that actor.
Other comments, questions? We are quickly coming to the end of our time, but I want everybody to jump in. Yeah, jump in.
I think too, in terms of what we're talking about with disabilities, we think about, or I try to think about too, all things being equal. Like when we do casting, even for educational theater, we're like, oh, should these two people can do it, but they're a senior. So if both of them can do it and do it successfully and do it well, we have a tendency then to give it to the senior because it's their last show. But if the junior or the freshman out, you know, is going to be much better than that senior, we give it. Well, I give it to the freshman. And so the same thing I think we can think about if the person with the disability can do it, though for me it's going to go, can they do it? It's going to move them up a little bit, like their portrayal is going to be, but if they can't do the last monologue or the whatever, you know, certain part, is there something different that I can do? You know, can I have somebody else step in next to that person to speak for them? Can, you know, we probably are all familiar with Deaf West's productions of, you know, different productions period, but the last one was Spring Awakening. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
But none of it originally was written that way in their production, but which characters are hearing and speaking. So I think it's just a interesting.
And I just cast Clue, and when I was casting Clue, one of the other things that I actually took into consideration when we're talking too is the past 2 years of COVID. Some of these kids haven't been able to be in a show, and now they're seniors or juniors, you know, or kids that were in shows last year. I tend to cast kids who weren't in shows last year because they haven't had the opportunity for the past couple of years to be in a show and just to be. My thing is equity, you know, being equity, you know, and having equity within my casting, you know, and making sure not only am I casting other people, but also saying like, okay, I know this person can do it, but also this person has been really working hard to want to do this, so maybe I'm going to give it to this person to give them that chance.
Which
you know?
is what makes educational theater
Right,
different
exactly,
than
you know.
professional
Yeah.
or anything else.
Well, and so this, not, kind of the opposite side of that is, one of my favorite shows to direct was Charlie Brown. Several of my actors are here. I want to do it again, and I want everybody to be over 70 years old. And I think it would be phenomenal because it's a completely different perspective on it. You see an older person doing it, and you're like, oh, they lived that experience. Yeah, they know what that is like. And again, because does it change the story at all? Does it matter who plays Charlie Brown? You know, we've already talked about it. No, but to me, it puts a different perspective in the audience's mind from the beginning.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot of shows, like there's this production of Doll's House that I saw, where all the men who were cast were under 5 feet, and all the women who were cast were over 6 feet.
Oh, wow.
I love that.
So they were all like,
I
and it was
love
deliberately
that.
cast that way.
Yeah.
And it just created a whole new dynamic, a whole new perspective of the story, and like really, you know, it was impactful, you know.
Well, that goes to our whole concept of theater and concept of what this show is anyway.
Yeah.
So what we choose to do and how we choose to, what we think will tell the story the best.
Yeah.
So that's the.
Do you, in your experience, you have multiple different educational and community, I know you all do. Is this problem, I don't want to use the word problem, but is this happening more in educational settings than so in community theater? Or is it the same across the board? Or is it
I think there's
more difficult to approach a community theater because people have expectations that way?
Well, and also I think you're at a school that schools are inherently usually diverse in terms of whether it's in race or whether it's in disability or sexual orientation or whatnot. You know, of course those numbers change depending where you're at. But I think there's more opportunity for that happening in a school setting where you have that group there already versus in community theater where you rely on the community to come and volunteer.
Well, and turnover too. I feel like there's more turnover in educational theater because they but
keep
in
matriculating.
Smaller community theater you see the same people playing this person who did this. There's also because that is the pool.
Yeah.
So if you are like a town I moved from before and it's like, oh yeah, they were the such and such and the last time and they were much better. Okay.
There's also we all have to continue to exist, but educational theater typically has some support from the school as an educational model. There's a space, whatever. Whereas in community, like you got to keep the money coming in, and so your choices become different based on who's gonna buy a ticket.
What will your audience accept?
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, not to knock my community, but that's part of the issue in the theaters in Michigan City is because one is kind of known as the old person theater, and one is known as the conservative theater, and the other one has now become we bring in people from Chicago and pay them theater. And that is their reputation now, and that is what you expect from them. And so there are certain things that are never going to be produced in Michigan City because those are the communities that they're known as. And that makes me sad that they won't break those.
But then you can also run into the problem of, because that community's been that way for so long, and they do want to become diverse and do something like ragtime or hairspray, and then they don't get the talent to come out for it because they they don't have the pool to pull from in their community. So it's again, it's not black and white. You have to sit down and analyze the situation to understand how to go
In the
about
best theatrical expression in improv, both and.
it. Yeah, both ends.
Both and. Love it. All right, any other burning comments, questions? Otherwise, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, panelists. If you weren't here before, this is part of Chautauqua in the Dunes, which is an organization we're based off of the Chautauqua Institute in New York. It's a model of education that is hands-on learning, and if you go to the Chautauqua Institute in New York, you would go and in the morning you'd sit through a lecture and then listen to a debate, and then you'd go do a hands-on workshop in ceramics, and then you'd go hear the Boston Pops play in the evening. And so it's very arts infused and history and just experiential learning. So there are about 50 of these organizations across the country, and so this is ours here in the Dunes area. And we used to be one weekend a year, and we have changed to a model of doing these workshops kind of throughout the year for different topics. So this was our character study one. Our next one will be more historical focused, and it is the second week of November, and we'll be talking about the history of Thanksgiving and how it came to be, and maybe the stories you think you have heard about the Pilgrims might not be exactly as you think. So that's
Cancel Christopher Columbus.
exactly. So that is the inspiration behind the history side of our workshop in a couple months.
So with ancient aliens.
Yes, that's exactly right. There is plenty of food. Please take some with you when you go, because we are done for the day, and
Right,
you are
thank you.
awesome.
No,
Don't do that.
this is the paint, the painting thing. At Wallace.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And so I was like, take pictures.
Being awesome.
So I meant for them to like.
How's everything going?
Crazy. Cancel our pictures. Halloween show, 'cause that's coming up.
I'll find out on Thursday.
Yeah. I mean, we picked a flexible show. And
Usually when girls will take
yeah, right.
things like that.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you still have to change things because the characteristics.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. So, yeah.
But that's kind of fun to do that.
Yeah.
And it's always cast straight, like, okay, what we.
Yeah, right. So that's kind of, and that's really handy that you have that. So, Janice is cute. There's everybody's whole show.
And ended up, the whole thing for doing the housing, they ended up, he's at home, he's going through he's home.
I've got my recording going. Let me stop that.